Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Here we go. Thank you, everybody, for joining. It's a snappy briefing on Japanese politics featuring Maya Matsuoka.
Good morning, Timothy, once again, and good morning to everybody who is listening to us in Clubhouse, watching us on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. It's a pleasure to have you again with us. And, we're having our 132nd session of Japanese Politics One-on-One with Timothy Langley, CEO of Langley Esquire, and me as a host, Maya Matsuoka. Despite the summer holidays, there have been quite a few events going on in Japanese politics, so there are no holidays there. And you can see that even though Timothy is not reporting from his office today, he's still with us. So,
Yes.
Timothy, I'm not going to keep you waiting. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Maya. Today is August 20th. This is the 132nd consecutive Sunday that we have been reporting on Japanese politics. So thank you, Maya, for doing that, for encouraging me, for threatening me to show up every Sunday. And also thank you to the audience. The audience continues to grow. Every week we break the previous week's record in terms of viewership and also in terms of engagement. So I try and compact a nice tight briefing on what's going on, what's happened in Japanese politics over the previous week. I try and do that in 30 minutes. I rarely succeed, but then we wrap it up with a 30-minute or so, sometimes longer, Q&A session. We're going to do that today as well. So the only thing that I ask in reward for this is please just hit like. You know, everybody that's in the audience, just hit like on this, whatever platform you're on. And, you know, maybe in the future, I'll ask you to subscribe or to post a comment. But for purposes of today, just hit like so that we get a bit more of a boost out of the Google Analytics so that we can get more people coming in and joining, finding out what's going on with Japanese politics and why it's so important to watch Japanese politics as a barometer of what's going on in the rest of Japanese society and business and culture and everything else that's going on. So let me get right into the news. Frequently, we talk mostly about what's going on with the prime minister because, you know, it's a somewhat of a pyramidal structure. He's at the head of it. And so what he does, what he's involved in, what interests him, what is going on within the LDP are critically important to predicting and understanding what's happening now and what's going to happen in the very near future. So let's get right to it. So he had a trilateral summit just this last week with President Yoon of South Korea, with Joe Biden, and the three of them got together in Camp David. This is the first time for President Biden to use Camp David with foreign dignitaries. He's been in office for almost 2 years, so this is the first time, pretty big. And it's also the first time for him to meet solidly with these two other country leaders. And what they did, I think, what we've been watching over the last couple of months is really something that should be, you know, admired and applauded. And however you feel about the administration of Joe Biden, this is one of the signature breakthroughs I think he's had, is to be able to bring, under a lot of threats and innuendo and what's going on with North Korea and Taiwan, but to bring together South Korea and Japan in a very meaningful relationship. It really is astounding, and it should be applauded, and it is making great headway. All of the things about, you know, the comfort women and what happened during the colonial period is beginning to fade. President Yoon he doesn't have a real hold on the Korean population. He won by a thin margin. He's trying to establish himself as a strong leader, but there's a large contingent of South Koreans that didn't vote for him and are opposed to his policies of reapproachment with the Japanese. But I think, you know, this is really significant what President Joe Biden has been able to do, and they've reached a couple of accords. They met for only one day, but you know, they were in town probably for the day beforehand, and actually the prime minister is now in Fukushima, so he came back on Friday night. So there's a lot going on his schedule, but they signed what is being called the Camp David Protocol, the Camp David Principles, where they will form an alliance, the three-way alliance. They will have a hotline established. They will meet every year, probably around this time every year, as a three-party summit. They're going to be focusing immediately on cybersecurity, supply chain, and on sharing defense capabilities. Most importantly of these is intelligence on what's going on with North Korea. So we had anticipated that our great leader, Mr. Kim from North Korea, would have launched another missile during the time that they were there. He didn't, so maybe the other shoe hasn't fallen yet. He probably will in due course, but we thought that maybe that would be something to just draw more attention to him. But there are exercises going on in the South Korean peninsula. There are naval exercises that are going on. And so this tension just continues to build, this cat and mouse game. But I think it's epical that the three leaders got together. He just came back, and that's a big deal for him. We always anticipated that this prime minister, Mr. Kishida, having been the longest serving foreign minister, would be really getting his chops in diplomacy and geopolitics, and he has. Unfortunately, on the domestic front, he's not doing as well. His popularity has really plummeted. It is at the lowest it has been since he took over. And the disapproval numbers are beginning to mount too, not just with regard to his cabinet. So the cabinet has a disapproval rating because of various scandals that are going on with the My Number system. People are throwing stones at Konotaro for some of the snafus that have happened there. There's also a kind of a lingering scandal within the prime minister's inner circle. The deputy chief cabinet secretary is a very good friend of his, long-term friend. He's in the Kishida faction, is implicated in a murder. The woman he married, her former husband, was found murdered in between the time that they were married but separated and the time that she married Mr. Kihara. So there's a lot going on. That was 10 years ago. The death was ruled a suicide by the public prosecutor's office. It has come out now because of Bunshun reporting that it wasn't really a suicide, it was a murder. And with a murder, you've obviously got a murderer that you need to identify. And clearly it wasn't his wife. So it is a mysterious thing that's going on. It's eating up a lot of spiritual energy that could otherwise be devoted elsewhere. So it's an issue that the prime minister has to deal with in light of his plummeting approval ratings and the fact that he in his popularity is actually beginning to level out a little bit, but it is still in the high 20s. The cabinet popularity is low. It's about maybe 26%. And no prime minister has been able to survive very long when his popularity or the popularity of the cabinet is at that level for a sustained period of time. And as you know, initially, after the local elections about 2 months ago, when the Diet was still in session, the prime minister was toying with the idea of having a snap election. So you can only have a snap election when you've got a little bit of political wind in your sails. He doesn't have that right now. He hasn't had it for 2 months. And the Kishida Yoon Biden summit in Camp David isn't going to provide that. And in fact, what we've got going forward is not looking very helpful too. So I'd like to get into those issues as we get further into this briefing. But hot on the news too is the Abe faction. So whenever we have these briefings, what's going on with the Abe faction is always a critical element, especially when there is movement, because it is the largest faction of all the LDP factions. There are 5 of them. The Abe faction, even without Shinzo Abe as the leader, is 100 people, and the next largest faction is 56 people. So it really is dominant. They don't have an identified leader. They've been struggling with that ever since the assassination. Initially, they came up with a triumvirate, and then it turned into about 5 people, and then 2 fell out. And the leadership has been run by a loose coalition of senior elders. Initially, well, not initially, but it came out that there was a little bit of a friction there, and maybe there would be a split in the faction, with one of the upper house members taking the upper house members of the faction with him and setting up a new faction. They've been able to mend that. They had their meeting on Thursday. They have their breakfast meeting every Thursday anyway. But this last Thursday was a big conclave. Everybody was there. to decide how we're going to establish the leadership. And once again, it is just a remix of what they had earlier, which is a committee of five individuals, and they've selected a leader by the name of a lower house leader by the name of, let me see, his name is Shino, gosh, I had his name right here. Shinoya Ryu. Shinoya Ryu is a longtime Abe confidant. He's been in the Abe faction. He's been reelected 10 times. And so one might think that if he's the leader, he's the spokesman, he's the chairperson of this new leadership faction, that probably he's going to be the next person that is hoisted up to become prime minister when that day comes. And I think maybe the reason why they selected him dictates that that's not going to happen. He is actually going to be a manager. He's going to be overseen, probably seen as the spokesman for the Abe faction. But we've talked about this before. There are two types of politicians in the lower house. One is the politician that runs because of his name and his recognition and his father and what he's done, and people vote for him as the individual. The second class of politician is the politician whose name is on a list that is provided to the voters. And the list is, you like for example, the LDP. So you've got two votes, one for the individual representative and one for proportional representation. And proportional means that for the number of votes that are collected by the party, then you might click off the first three names and they become members of the Diet. Or if you get a lot of votes, the list could go down 15, 20, 30 people. So everybody provides their names on that list. It's not really on their own validation, but on the party validation and the fact that they were a bureaucrat or they were an author or they did something remarkable, they become a member of the parliament. So of those two politicians, the politician who wins because of his own validation, because of his own personality or his family heritage, they, inside the Diet, they have more power, they have more push, because they can say, 600,000 people voted for me, and they didn't even actually vote for you. You were, you were whisked in because of a popularity vote because of the party. So Mr. Shinoya Ryu, his election district is the proportional representation system. So he's never been elected based on his own stance or his own personality or the comments that he's made in the Diet. So it kind of restricts him from being actually a successful candidate for prime minister. So in fact, I think what they did is, rather than having some of the big heavyweights who are potentially going to be a candidate for prime minister, they've pushed those guys to committee members. And the chief spokesman, the chief committee chair, is somebody like Shinoya, who can actually help bring together the forces and help Seiwakai select the next candidate for prime minister. So when we talk about the next candidate for prime minister, obviously everybody wonders when that's going to be. Is there going to be a snap election? And if you look at the tea leaves carefully, it doesn't look like there can be a snap election right away. There are too many things going on. But the next thing that is going to be occupying the prime minister's schedule is a realignment of his cabinet. So we know that that's going to happen. It's probably going to happen in mid to late September. He's got too many international trips going. He's got the G20, he's got the UN convention, he's got a lot of things. He's got to travel to Malaysia. All of this happens within the first 2 weeks of September. So coming back from that, it is expected that he will announce his cabinet reshuffle, and he's got a lot to do there. So one of the key issues that he's considering is taking out certain members who have a certain base of popularity and inserting into those positions somebody that he owes a debt of gratitude to, or somebody who he thinks will boost his popularity, because with a successful change of the cabinet, then he can build up on having a snap election. And I think, from my perspective right now, maybe the best bet is just to live out his presidency until August or the fall of next year, and then there'll be an election for prime minister again. Hopefully he will garner enough appreciation and admiration from the population that he will be a shoo-in, but it's unlikely well, it's unsure whether he will be able to remain in the shoes of the prime minister even that long. There are a lot of storm clouds on the horizon. The first one he is dealing with today. The prime minister is in Fukushima talking about the release of the water that is inevitable. It's going to happen, and he's probably going to announce it on Tuesday. So he's got a meeting with his cabinet specifically geared towards talking about the Fukushima water release. And I expect that he's going to announce the start of the water release, and I believe it will be this month. He will announce it, and then very quickly the water will start to be released. On the heels of that, other people are reading this too and watching this program. A hacker group, the Anonymous, has hacked these web pages that are geared towards promoting the water release and talking about how safe it's going to be. So they've been hacked over the last 2 weeks. And so this is a worrying thing for the prime minister and also for the the press here. The other thing that is upsetting to the prime minister, something he has to confront, is as his popularity goes down. I mean, if this is your first briefing to attend, last week we talked about the ranking of popularity. The LDP scored at about 28 or 29% popularity among the general population. And below them are the other opposition parties. The Communist Party scored around 3% appreciation. The Joshi Seikai party logged in at 0%. The Constitutional Democratic Party logged in at around 7%. So Ishin's numbers were only, maybe 4.8%. So they're very minor, but these numbers can be turned very quickly just because of a scandal or because of an inference that somebody made, some sort of gaffe. And so the numbers can change very quickly. And the prime minister is increasingly worried, and the LDP is worried about Ishin coming up. So they had the local elections about 6 weeks or almost 2 months ago, and Ishin did particularly well. In Sendai, of the 5 seats, the local seats that were available, Ishin took all of them. So it's no longer just a Kansai political party. It is somewhat of a right-wing party, as the LDP is a right-wing party, and their dream is to be the contender to power in Japanese politics. They want it to be a real two-party competition, and it is not now. You've got the LDP, and then you've got the opposition, and it's a very hard nut to crack. So I think that you will be seeing more coming out of Ishin, and also the coalition between the LDP and Komeito is beginning to show some real fractures. So, as you might know, Komeito has been in a coalition with the LDP for almost 20 years. And as a result of that, they are able to have more than just a flat majority in both houses, in the upper house and the lower house. What they have to do to reward Komeito is to give them a cabinet portfolio. And for the last 10 years, that has been the Minister of Land, Transportation, and Tourism. And now there's beginning to be a little bit of a stink raised up, because there are people within the LDP who are saying, that ministry, it's with public works. So they're riding on that they are the party of the people, and they're pumping more money into the economy, doing more public works, but they're pretty much really generating more affinity with the construction companies. And it's not to say it's pork barrel, but it is it's a huge part of the economy, and generating licenses and authorizations coming out of that ministry does generate a lot of goodwill. And the LDP says we shouldn't allow them to take that, even as a coalition partner. Give them something else. And 10 years of that valuable ministry, it's really too much for us, and let's take it away from them. That position has been opposed by Komeito. They want to stay in that position. They want to keep that position. And I think that is also causing some problems within the relationship, which is suffering for a lot of different reasons. But I think the LDP is going to move on that. So there are 3 or 4 cabinet members that you can pretty much guarantee are going to be moving from their cabinet portfolio into another position. And one of those would probably be land and transportation. That doesn't mean that Komeito will not get another cabinet portfolio, but it'll be a different one. But somebody else will move into that. Also, the likelihood of Konotara being removed as digital minister, I don't know if that's a great choice. I think he's doing a good job, but somebody has to take the blame for all of the problems that are being generated, and that's probably him. He also needs to do some LDP administrative cleanup, and the first one there is the Director General of the LDP, who has the third largest faction and is not on great terms with the Prime Minister, and is going to make a bid for Prime Minister between now and the next time the election comes up for LDP. So he will probably be moved out. He's already had a couple of very high-profile political appointments, including cabinet positions. So the only cabinet position that is available to him that is of that status that he hasn't already occupied, he's been foreign minister, he's been minister of METI, is the finance minister's position. And I think probably Taro Aso is not going to want to do that. Taro Aso, as you know, is the current vice president of the LDP. He was the longest serving finance minister under Mr. Abe. And when he left that because of the change of the leadership and with Mr. Kishida taking over as prime minister, he stayed as vice prime minister, but he gave up his portfolio in the finance minister to one of the people in his faction. So it's unlikely that he's going to give that up. He was just in Taiwan last week, as you might recall from last week's briefing, and that was a big signal that Japan is tight with Taiwan and is not going to allow them to be invaded without a serious repercussion from Japan. So that's a pretty big deal and signals other things. So the big issue here is Ishin versus the LDP. And when the election comes up, when there is a snap election, I think the Prime Minister missed his chance to hold it earlier because Ishin is now very well prepared. It's got candidates that it can run in far more districts. And you can tell that Ishin is a bit of a worry because Bunshun attacked their leader, Mr. Baba, in last week's Bunshun series. It was an article on his potential corruption charges. Somebody complained about him being the chairman of a retirement home, and one of the retirees being somewhat maybe coming into dementia, but also having a lapse in memory, and nobody taking care of him, but with large land holdings, somehow released his land holdings to a firm that was overseen by Mr. Baba. So these things come up. Bunshun, if it has one series, it's not a big deal. If it's repeated in a series twice in a month, it's a serious issue. With Mr. Kihara and the murder of his wife's former husband, that's been going on consecutively for 6 weeks. So it's causing a big problem for the Prime Minister. Moving on to exports, they have suffered a decline for the last 2 months. So talking about the Japanese economy, the yen traded at, let me see, 145.6 to the dollar this last week on Thursday. And the trigger point previously in October last year was 154.9. So just a few percentage points from where it is today. And the Bank of Japan jumped in, the finance ministry jumped in, they intervened in the yen. Not many people know this, but they intervened so massively, they spent $62 billion to prop up the yen. That's $62 billion that they just put into purchasing yen-dominated bonds. So it didn't really buy anything, it just propped up the yen. $62 billion, that is just unheard of. I mean, it's far larger than the defense budget that they're going to spend in the next 5 years to bring the defense spending from 1% to 2%. So people are waiting, is this trigger going to be established there at 145.5 or 6 yen to the dollar? And it looks like we're going to blow past that perhaps this week. But analysts are saying it's become more of an artificial ceiling, that the Japanese bank, the Bank of Japan, and the finance ministry are not going to move on it as aggressively as they did last year, and it's just one of the costs of business. So as a consequence of that, exports declining is a big deal, because it tells you that even at a cheaper price that is being charged for these exports, they're not selling. And chief among those is products related to chip production, mostly with China. So China is Japan's number 2 trading partner, and chips and parts and chemicals for that are a big portion of the trade there. So the export restrictions took over 2 weeks ago. We reported on that. No more trade with China on these equipments. And so as a result of that, you've got this issue coming in. And not only that, but the subsidy for the gasoline and the fuel prices also was removed. So fuel prices are going up. So once again, the inflation, how much it costs to actually live here, continues to increase. No matter what the prime minister says about, encouraging people to have more children or to raise wages, it really hasn't taken hold. People are still suffering. Trade and travel within the country is increasing, but it is down way before the COVID hit us in 2019. Fortunately, though, inbound travel is increasing. We are probably at around 78% of where we were in 2019, and that's without the Chinese coming in. So the Chinese allowed the Chinese nationals to travel to Japan for tourism just last week. On Wednesday of last week, the first tour groups from China began to come in. And before COVID hit in 2019, the Chinese tourists were 1/3 of what the trade was in tourism. So people complain about it, all of the stores being raided is not the right word, but bakugai, the Chinese coming in and buying everything off the shelves, and multiple items like rice cookers. They'd buy 5 of those, and they're getting back on the bus carrying all of this luggage. So the Japanese economy is looking forward to that with some trepidation, but that can pump another 1 trillion yen into the economy on an annual basis. So that is looked forward to, but still, the trade numbers are not looking good for the prime minister. Tourism, dollars that are generated in tourism are counted as exports. It's not counted as a domestic GDP. So the more that comes in, tourism is considered to be an activant to other parts of the economy, hotels, restaurants, various amusement parks, and that sort of thing begin to get an uptick. But the Japanese economy needs more than that. They need more and higher wages for the Japanese working population. So they floated an idea just this last week at the Prime Minister's office about rewarding companies that raise their wages with tax credits. And we knew that this was coming because there are very few sticks that the Prime Minister has, and one of those is there's increasing taxes to pay for the defense spending, the 2% defense spending. One of those is corporate taxes, one of those is individual taxes, one of those is tobacco tax, and the other is tightening the belt of the Japanese administrative body, which means some of the assets that the Japanese government owns, like Japan Tobacco or NTT, they would be selling those off. They would sell those off, they would reap the rewards of those high prices and supplement the cost of the defense budget. But there are also 3 other components. One of those is corporate taxes. So the idea is to wink and nod for those companies who are raising their wages. And in fact, although we had the spring offensive that raised wages remarkably compared to other years, it still wasn't enough to keep up with inflation. So companies are now coming a little bit more aggressively to the party, and they're paying higher wages, but it's not specifically under government intervention. But the economy is suffering because of that, and you can see that just naturally in the number of babies that are produced. It's not an issue that's isolated to Japan. All advanced economies are going through that decline in population. It's just that Japan is at the vanguard of that. Japan is losing its population quicker than the other economies, but other advanced economies of the G20 are also suffering in a population decline. So related to that, the trade balance shrank this last month, somewhat alarming to the administrators. It fell 78.7 billion yen, which is about $538 million. So it's not a huge figure, but it is a decline. And it's the first decline in 2 years. So even over COVID, it didn't decline like that. So this decline is very worrisome. And so the Prime Minister has all of these balls in the air. Calling for an election is really not a good idea for him. We frequently talk about the military expenditures and the coalition building with like-minded countries that Japan has been encouraged to embark on with the encouragement of the United States. And one of those is Quad, and the other is the trilateral relationship with South Korea. But you can see these things beginning to grow and build. And the fact that we have Article 9 of the Constitution, I think is just, it's got to go by the wayside because there's too much other stuff going on. And this anticipation of China actually moving on Taiwan and building this deterrence. And this deterrence effort is really building up, picking up steam. So for the first time since the Status of Forces Agreement was signed by the United States and Japan in 1960, there were huge riots. You might remember in Tokyo, the Tokyo University riots, fire bombs, police being attacked and killed. It was just a huge time. And the Status of Forces Agreement, which dominates the relationship between the United States and Japan. It establishes what's going on in Okinawa as well. That is being bolstered now for the first time. Australia is now having a bit of action there where they can station their forces in Japan, and Japanese self-defense forces can be stationed in Australia. This is growing at a really, I mean, it could be said an alarming rate, but if you're kind of thinking about Japan's role in the South Pacific and the fact that there is no real central leader and that anything could happen in North Korea or in Taiwan or even in Sakhalin. So there are military naval exercises in the north too, with China and Russia having joint naval exercises, which is very worrisome. So Japan has the Air Self-Defense Forces has a fleet of F-35s, and these fighters are now going to go on joint exercises. They're leaving for Australia this next week. They will fly to Guam, and then they will fly into northern Australia. They will have joint exercises with the Australians, and the Australians will be coming up later in the year and stationing, maybe, I don't know if it's actually stationing, but they'll be coming with about 500 personnel. The exercises include tankers and a fleet of F-35s. So it's a big deal. And this thing with the Quad, I mean, we all understand India is kind of in and kind of not in, but United States, Japan, and Australia are very much into it. And it has emerged that Australia is now, you know, on defense terms, you know, Japan's second best friend besides the United States. So there's a lot going on there and a lot to be expected. So there's an exercise that's going on this next week. It is called the Yamasakura exercise with the United States. And this is the start of the reciprocal access agreement, which was signed maybe 6 months ago, that talks about all of these things of joint forces and sharing facilities and stationing of troops. So it's going into effect just this last week. And you can see that with the F-35s and the presence of Australian troops here in Japan. It will be a noteworthy item when it becomes a little bit more obvious, but we're just at the beginning of that. You might have been following that Taiwan's vice president visited Paraguay this last week. So Paraguay went through an election for president. They have a new president, and Taiwan's vice president traveled to Paraguay to participate in the inauguration of the president. A lot of fanfare. Paraguay is the only country in South America that recognizes Taiwan as a sovereign country. I think there are 15 countries in the world that do. Everybody else has kind of backed off. They have a neutral stance, like Japan, like the United States. They recognize business relationships, but they don't have diplomatic ties, although the United States has something that's not quite an embassy, but it acts kind of like an embassy without actually going that far. Japan, similarly. So you don't want to rattle the cage of China, but you still want to have trade relations. Like I said earlier, the vice president of the vice president of the LDP, Taro Aso, visited Taiwan just last week and made a lot of pronouncements about Japan standing with Taiwan in defending it against encroachment. So there's a lot of verbiage that's going on there, but I think a lot of pieces are falling into place too, physical pieces. So he visited Paraguay and used this opportunity to visit New York on the way to Paraguay, and then coming back, visiting San Francisco, and once again causing great consternation in China. So they ramped up their military exercises over Taiwan in protest to this. But this envelopment of protecting Taiwan continues on all sorts of different levels, and it looks like more and more gradually Japan is at the center of that. And I think geopolitically, you've got to imagine that it makes a certain amount of sense. You might not have noticed, but let me see, it was Tuesday was the 78th, it's not an anniversary, it's recognized as the end of war day. Kinembi, it kind of suggests it's an anniversary. There's no anniversary about it. The war ended 78 years ago, this last Wednesday. And the focal point of that day is frequently in Yasukuni, which is very close to my office in central Tokyo, and the Budokan, where the emperor and the empress made condolences. They had a full crowd there. The fact that the war ended is, I mean, we're all here today because of that, and Japan has become the country it is as a result of that. Never in human history has a country emerged from the ashes of war like Japan has. So it's a very big deal. Okinawa fell 2 months ago, and really shocked the Japanese, because from Okinawa you can take off planes and bomb Japan proper, although Japan had been being bombed and strafed anyway. But less than 2 months later, first Hiroshima, 3 days later, and this was 2 weeks ago, Hiroshima, 3 days later, Nagasaki, and then 2 days later, capitulation. So all of this in a historical context is very important for those people who are listening in on this this briefing. I know you're all seasoned Japan hands. It's something that we all live with. We can't forget it, and it's a part of this relationship that we have with this wonderful country. So just keep that in mind. And finally, I think that's finally it. I've already talked about the release of the Fukushima water, about Komeito really itching to contain and maintain their position as Minister of Labor and Tourism, Land, Labor, and Tourism, and the fact that they might be exiting. We didn't talk about Expo. So Expo falls into that too. And this context of Ishin being on the rise in Osaka and Expo not really being able to fill their pavilions. Only South Korea has said of the 50 pavilions that need to be built by individual countries to showcase their wares and to build a pavilion and then leave it 6 months later so that it can be used for other purposes. Only one country is ponied up for that, and that's South Korea. And that falls on the Ministry of Labor, Land, and Transportation. It also falls on a couple of other people, mostly Osaka, the Osaka governor, the Osaka mayor, the construction companies that are trying to build these pavilions. So we haven't really talked about that. No news is to be reported there, but once again, no countries have shown up for that. So it could be a big black eye for Osaka, and a big black eye for Osaka could be because we want to diminish Komeito as the chief head of the ministry, but also we want to diminish Ishin in their own district and put some damper on their wings. So there's a lot going on there. I hope this briefing gives you a little bit more flavor of what's going on in Japanese politics. I apologize if it's not all gelling, but we can get into that deeper in the Q&A. Please hit like, subscribe, comment on our content. We really look forward to it, and thank you very much for tuning in every Sunday. Thanks, Maya.
Thank you, Timothy. Apologies for this. Thank you. I can see that, well, it's getting really hotter on your side there. So hopefully you're not going to melt before we finish the briefing. Great. Okay, so we're moving into the questions and answers session. And I have a couple of questions. I invite everybody who is watching us in Clubhouse too to share your questions if you have them, or your comments, of course, observations if you want to. You can come up on stage with us as well. So you're very welcome to do that. So, Timothy, you mentioned that the Abe faction uh, has a new leadership. So it's again a board of 5 individuals, and that the new leader, so Shionoya-san, Shionoya-san,
Shionoya Ryu,
yes,
right?
Ryu, yes, that he actually already has a couple of ministerial portfolios or positions in his portfolio.
That's right.
Yes, so it means that he is a valid candidate for the post of prime minister in the future. No?
No.
Okay.
And the reason why he isn't, although he has several portfolios. So when Tado Asa was prime minister, he was Minister of Land, Transportation, and Tourism, just the issue we were talking about earlier. That once they had that coalition, so Komeito didn't always have that ministerial portfolio. Before Mr. Abe, they had other portfolios that they jumped around in. But over the last 10 years, they have the Ministry of Land, Transportation, and Tourism. So he did serve that position under the invitation of Tado Aso. So there's a little bit of a relationship going on there. He's had other ministerial or party leadership posts. So he is a person of influence, but because he only came from the proportional representation system and not from the individually elected voting system, his status is a little bit different. And among people in the Diet, they know that very clearly. So somebody who won because his voice and his politics or his dad or whatever, he won on those grounds. They know that they have more weight, they carry more, they get better positions, they get better committee assignments. They're just given more deference. So I think he was chosen because he probably can't become prime minister unless the Abe faction totally got behind him and said, he's the one we want to be prime minister. But I don't see that happening. There are too many people, and the reason why we've had this reshuffle of this leadership group is because the other leadership group was full of those people who were all vying to become the next person blessed by the Abe faction. And it just froze everything in place because they can't agree. I want to be the prime minister. No, I don't want you to be the prime minister. It's just that situation. And at the anniversary of the assassination of Mr. Abe, we thought that there would be a meeting on Thursday where they would come to terms with that and they would pick that one guy. They failed at that. And the idea of having Mr. Seko take all of the people from the upper house and make his own faction. So it's all a compromise. I think as you're suggesting, it's not a compromise that's going to work very well or for very long. So it is newsworthy that they hopefully have come to terms with it, and that when it comes time for an election, they will get their act together. But the most important thing I think they've realized and acknowledged is that as a 100-member body, we can sway a lot with the prime minister, especially with this prime minister. So before he does anything, he should call up the Abe faction and say, look, I'm thinking of this. What do you guys think? It's not like negotiating with Komeito. With Komeito, they just tell them what they're going to do, and they've given them a portfolio, so, live with it. They do negotiate with them on some issues with regard to public works or with social welfare, or raising the minimum wage, things like that. But for big ticket items, it's more LDP decided.
Well, it looks also that the power vacuum that appeared after the assassination of Prime Minister Abe is still there.
Yes, it is.
Right, and that prime minister's seat is very contested. Do you think that that power vacuum will eventually, the issue will be resolved, even at some point by the end of this year?
I think only in the crucible of an election will that be figured out. So one of the key individuals hasn't really surfaced much. That's Mr. Suga. Mr. Suga doesn't have a political faction, but he's got a group around him, and he hasn't really moved in very aggressively about what he wants to do. And I think any shakeout has got to include, him as well. So, he's very friendly with Komeito. He's very friendly with Ishin too. So as Ishin begins to emerge, there could be coalitions between the LDP and Ishin to, capture the government or to get beyond 2/3. So that's the driving force. So with the LDP and Komeito kind of really holding back a little bit, we're not going to even vote for you guys in an LDP candidate for Tokyo, the wards of Tokyo. If there's an election for the lower house, we're not even going to support you, whereas before they supported them all over the country. So Komeito might be falling a little bit behind, but what the LDP needs and requires is 2/3 in the upper house, 2/3 in the lower house, because one of the principles of the LDP is to change the Constitution, particularly Article 9. So that's coming down at us very quickly. So that might be the activant that triggers a realignment, Ishin perhaps, or Suga perhaps. Maybe Komeito has seen its time. There's no filler for that, but changing the Constitution is, it's the driving force behind the LDP. It's often pushed to the sidelines. People don't talk about it very much, but it is.
Right. And you mentioned Ishin, quite a few times today, and it looks like Mr. Baba has been talking about capturing some more seats in the Diet if the LDP doesn't get majority. And do you think that probably if that happens, Mr. Suga is going to play some role there?
Absolutely.
Because absolutely, okay. Even though he doesn't have his own faction.
Even though he doesn't have his own faction,
Right.
but he became.
Okay, thank you. And then we're.
Sorry, I just wanted to say that even though he didn't have his own faction, he became prime minister.
Yeah.
So it is Japanese politics.
Yes.
So sometimes the unexpected can happen, and I think we're moving into that zone, that the unexpected can happen, that the LDP can be successful in changing Article 9, that astounding as it might sound to us, especially if we push ourselves back 10 years, that Japan will have and start to develop a military industrial complex, and that they will be building equipment and war material for export that has offensive capabilities. I think it's very close to the horizon.
Okay, thank you for that. Well, I guess we need to wait and see, but yes, and we'll be talking about this as well. So, Hiroku-san, thank you very much for giving us the ministerial posts of Shionoya, Mr. Shionoya on LinkedIn. And also, we have a question about South Korea, but before we move, to the diplomatic relations there is a question, Timothy, in Clubhouse, which I'm going to read out to you. So okay. It is about, it is from somebody who is listening to us there, and the person asks, can you talk about the Japanese government selling stock in some of the companies they own to actually to pay for the military expenses, and what companies they might sell?
Who is this individual?
Oh, he's using a handle name called Businessman. So
okay, so really Businessman wasn't here this last week, right? So Businessman, please try and join us every week. We dealt with this issue just this last week, and we talked specifically. And in fact, Maya, you and I talked about this maybe a month ago. We received a document from the Japanese government that has, it was what, 120 pages, Maya, It had the list of all of the assets that are owned or partially owned by the Japanese government.
Yes.
And in our last week's briefing, we talked about NTT, which is 33 and a few points over 33% owned by the Japanese government. Japan Tobacco, 33% owned by the Japanese government. It used to be Japan Post Office was 100% owned by the Japanese government, and they sold that off under the administration of, who was that? The fellow with the hair.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Okay, that's okay.
So that was sold off to generate revenue for the government coffers. It was a big deal back then, but selling off these assets is required because the trillions of yen that are required every year for 5 years to boost the defense spending from 1% to 2%, it can't be hoisted completely on the Japanese population. The Japanese prime minister would collapse his administration if he raised the consumption tax. So he's got to come up with it in other places. But yeah, NTT, Japan Tobacco, these are just being talked about right now. I don't know if it will be actually implemented, but they can't raise the consumption tax. So the prime minister is looking at all of these. If you're more interested, maybe go back and listen to the briefing that we had last week. But if there's more interest in it, we can talk about those assets. And whenever there's a news report where these assets have actually been sold, we will report on it. But also, the Japanese government said we're going to back off a little bit on this 2% because we see right now that we don't have the money to do that. So in year one, they're actually spending 128% more than they spent earlier. So this is the first year. This is in 2024. They've already spent more than what they predicted they would, with the idea that in the second year, they won't spend as much. They need to prime the pump, so to speak. But they've already realized that in year two, we don't have the money to do that. So we're going to skip that and maybe do it in year three. So it's still very confusing. Still a lot needs to be decided. But all you need is another rocket from North Korea or some sort of incursion from China, or maybe missile exercises by the joint Chinese-Russian fleet, for something to happen, for a fishing boat to be hit with debris, and all of a sudden pandemonium. And then you're going to see a lot of things just break loose and the toggles will begin to turn. That's my prediction.
Right. Let's hope it's never gets to that point. But well, we'll see. Okay. And then there is a question from Nami on LinkedIn. So the question is, what is the general opinion of the Japanese public regarding efforts to improve relations between Japan and South Korea?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think like the relations with many countries with Americans, many people like the Americans, but they don't like the American government. And similarly, with Koreans, with regard to Japanese, they don't like the Japanese government, but the affinity between Koreans and regular Japanese people is very rich. The number of people who are traveling from Japan to South Korea is enormous, and it's even greater from the South Koreans coming to Japan. So there's a lot of affinity there. There's a lot of admiration, mutual respect. At the government level, it's a little bit tougher. And like Nippon Kaigi, they have their own little pockets of resistance in South Korea too, that are against the Japanese, that suffered under the Japanese, that will never forget, and they will always remember, how much torture, how much they were destroyed, how many temples were, moved, how many names had to be changed to accommodate the Japanese colonization. So it's just one of those things, and I think it just takes a tremendous amount of effort, which is why I've taken my hat off to the efforts of the United States and Joe Biden to seal those wounds. It really needs to happen. I mean, they're so close. There's so much historical affinity, cultural affinity there. It is unfortunate what happened during the colonial period, but we need, for a lot of different reasons, to move beyond that. I don't have any numbers for you, Nami, but yeah, maybe I should look into that and see what this statisticians report.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that. And also, So in Clubhouse, we have once again a comment from Hiroko-san, and she's saying that in Osaka, where we're going back to the Ishin issues, in Osaka, some politicians, including mayor of Higashi Osaka, changed the party from the LDP to Ishin in preparation
Yep.
for the election. Yes. So there seems to have been quite a lot of, let's say, flow between the LDP and Ishin. So it's, well, one direction, obviously.
Look, people see that wave coming. They can sense it, especially if you're in Kansai, that it's coming, it's building. And if you want to stay a politician, yeah, sometimes you cut your losses and you change parties. For some people, that destroys the rest of their career. So although it is the aim of every politician to become prime minister, you take a move like that and already you're painted. It's something that people can throw rocks at throughout the rest of your career. So it's a big deal. But for some people, remaining a member of parliament is the most important thing. It's Machiavelli's prince. The end justifies the means. So I've got to stay a politician under whatever banner. And in fact, Ishin and the LDP, it's loyalty, it's legacy. But the parties are not that substantially different. It's just that the LDP has been in power for so long, so they've got their fingers in everything, and that irritates people. That means the outsider, as long as they have politicians that look crisper, that are better integrated, that are presented with a younger or more youthful face or delivery, yeah, it begins to attract. And people are kind of sick of the LDP, all the time, and all of the shenanigans. And so that's whenever you hear anything about a scandal. Sometimes it's not really a scandal. It's just the flow of life happening to people, but they build it out as a scandal, just to create that kind of controversy in the voters' minds when they're presented with two options, to choose the one that has the less negatives assigned to it.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that. And well, we have a couple more comments in Clubhouse. So the first one is from Gerard, and it is: I have in the past been quite adamant about Japan retaining the pacifist Article 9, but growing threats from the likes of China and North Korea, also Russia, would have my vote for the change.
Yes.
If it were Japanese. Yes. And also, I'll go ahead, Timothy. Sorry.
So kind of unrelated to that, but I visited Yasukuni on Tuesday. I feel very strongly about the war. I grew up as a military brat. I spent my active adolescence growing up on the island of Okinawa. So I have a strong feeling for what Japan went through, and also what the Japanese people are attempting to do. And one thing I noticed, I do this every year, one thing I noticed this year was the large number of young Japanese that were paying their respects. And I hadn't really noticed it that much in years previous. There were a lot of Uyoku, the right-wingers that were there. They were somewhat reduced in presence this year, but I think that was by design by the National Police Agency. But they still were there. You saw people in the old uniforms and swashbucklers, that sort of thing. But not as many young people in the past as there were this year. So it was somewhat remarkable. So I think the Japanese people are becoming, like you, Gerard, accustomed to the reality of the current situation, and the fact that if Japan doesn't pick up that mantle, nobody else will, even though there's hatred. People in South Korea, the Japanese warships, battleships show up. They still have the rising sun flag. They didn't diminish that. They said they're going to stick with that flag. It does create a little bit more controversy because of the memories that it triggers. But yeah, I think it's inevitable. And you look at just all the military exercises that are going on, and the status of forces agreement with Australia, and pretty soon it's going to be the British too. The British are working on having a similar relationship. So Japan, it's going to be like this hub of all of these international relations with France, not so much with France, but with England, with Italy. They're jointly developing the fighter, the next generation fighter with Australia. The other thing I didn't mention was and it's related to this issue that you bring up, is one of the agreements. So they had the trilateral meeting in Camp David, but the president also had a one-on-one with Mr. Kishida, and they agreed to co-develop this missile to attack the hypersonic missiles that potentially are coming in. And that development will go on for the next 8 years, and it will be co-developed by Japan and the United States. So this is an export vehicle. This is something that other countries can purchase from Japan. And so once again, we see this buildup of this military industrial complex under the guise of protecting Japan from North Korea, from potentially China as well. So yeah, this whole thing that we've grown up to appreciate about the peace constitution and Japan being, restricted by Article 9 and admiring it for that, I think it's quickly going by the wayside, as you've identified.
Right. Yes, we have, and we have a couple of more comments. One of them is on LinkedIn from Greg, and then another one is from Eleanor and also Han in Clubhouse. So I'll start with Greg. And his question is, how does Tokyo Governor Koike fit into the current landscape? Is she likely to toss her hat in national politics again, perhaps leveraging on an up-and-coming party?
That's a great question, Greg. You weren't here this last week. Governor Koike did come up maybe 2 weeks ago in a discussion that we had, and there was a little bit of back and forth about her throwing her hat into the ring. My analysis was that she's going to run for governor again. She's just announced that. And I think the fact that she could become a candidate in one of the seats in Tokyo to be a lower house member, guaranteed she would win that as a lower house member. But she doesn't have a political faction. She's got a party that somewhat is behind her in the Tokyo politics. And it's a pretty big deal. Tokyo hosting the central government here in Nagata-cho, to be the leader of the largest megalopolis in the world, compared to being a member of the lower house and building up your credentials so that you could potentially run for prime minister, that's a 2 or 3 cycle, not year, cycle. So how many years a certain cycle is going to be as a member of the lower house. It'll take 2 or 3 cycles for her to generate the kind of general respectability that she's going to need to throw her hat into the ring as prime minister. I could be wrong. I could be wrong that, even with what she's already achieved, she could come in as a lower house member and say, the election's coming up for prime minister. I want to be prime minister. I think that would be a hard sell. I mean, running the central government is going to be vastly different from running the largest city. You still got, impressive chops, but dealing with the press and the population and the LDP and I just don't see it happening. And if it was me, I would stay as governor of Tokyo. That's a pretty great achievement.
Right. It's a pretty great achievement indeed. Okay, and then we are going back to Clubhouse now from Han. I'm curious about the reasons for Ishin's growing popularity. Is it because the party presents a viable alternative to the LDP, or people are attracted to Ishin's political agenda?
So we had this poll that we talked about in depth last week. It was kind of the headline of my briefing last week, where the results of the poll, and it was an extensive poll taken by GG Press, and one of the questions they asked was, as prime minister, how do you rate Mr. Kishida, and is there a reason that would compel you to vote for somebody else instead of him as prime minister? And the vast majority of the people who opined there, about 74%, said, I would stick with Kishida because there's nobody else that's kind of around that even represents prime ministerial material. And they say that every time. When Mr. Abe was prime minister, they said, yeah, he's the prime minister, but there's nobody else in the constellation that could, in my mind, represent the country as prime minister. So it's kind of an influence of apathy. I'm not willing to think that deeply about it, and he's got the position, so I guess he's okay. But I think that yeah, the prime minister is he's in sorry, he's in that position because he's in that position, and knocking him down is not that hard, but asserting yourself as a candidate is a little bit more difficult. I don't know
Okay,
if that addressed the question though, Maya.
well, I'm not sure, but if it does not, if somebody, oh, well, let's say if Han needs more
Please come back at
clarification,
us,
Han,
Han.
I invite you to ask more and actually let us know about that. Also, Gabor says that, well, the LDP should be, well, in a terrible state if they need new candidates there. I'm not going to read the whole comment out loud.
Okay, so I'm kind of reminded what the question was. Why is the LDP? Why can't Ishin come up? I mean, is it their policies and that sort of thing? And I think one of the reasons why, the LDP is because it's kind of like Mr. Kishida. There's nobody else that's similar to them. But with Ishin, there is somebody that's similar to them. They are right wing. They're for the Japanese revision of Article 9. They are business centered. And I think their main play here is freshness and new ideas. And coming from Osaka, there's always this tension between Osaka and Tokyo. And they've built up this base, and they've also built up this momentum that we are a contender to running the country. It doesn't need to be the LDP and pork barrel politics and all of this stuff and this kind of heritage of these generation after generation of these politicians. We have something fresher to offer. And I think giving them one cycle, maybe two cycles, they can really contend with the LDP. So all you need is a couple of scandals, a couple of gaffes during a presidential election, or maybe during the lower house election, and the tide could shift very quickly. And the LDP is nothing if not accommodating to establish their preeminence. And what that means is 2/3. They want 2/3 in the upper house and 2/3 in the lower house. They'll horse trade for that. They will accommodate. They will give out portfolios for cabinet posts, and they will make alliances that maybe somehow don't make sense. The Komeito and LDP alliance didn't make sense at first. So the fact that Ishin can come up, and they're not restricted as they would be with Komeito. Komeito is about being nicer and friendlier to the downtrodden and help the people who aren't making enough money to make ends meet. That's their base. And the LDP is more about, let's make money, let's do business, let's expand the military. So with Komeito not there and Ishin as a partner there, they could achieve far more and be more dominant. But maybe Ishin wouldn't want to do it. Maybe Ishin would say, we want to be the outlier. We want to be the contender. We don't want to be absorbed by the LDP. So there's some tough decisions to be made by Ishin too. But it's all in the cards. We can't read them right now. You're on mute. So maybe we lost the feed, Maya?
I see. Okay.
So that question, there you go.
Okay, so yes, I left the live stream for a second. And yes, I wanted just to say that Mr. Baba seems to have a lot of confidence that they can reach, new heights every half a year or every year. Or
Listen,
every
that is not based on a guess. His target in this last local election was 600, and he got 720. So he far exceeded what his expectations were. So he's sitting high. He's young. He's vibrant. They've got that Bunshun article. I don't think it will be a successful attack on him. But Ishin is on a roll, and I think Mr. Baba is, he's going to be a contender. I think the prime minister is seriously worried about him.
Right. Yes. So, this is another thing that we will be reporting on, and we'll wait and see. Actually.
Thanks, Gabor.
Thank you, Gabor. Yes. Great. So, Timothy, I think that we
can...
No,
what about Eleanor? Eleanor had a question.
Oh, Eleanor, yes, it's actually a clarification. Yes, thank you for that, Timothy. So from Eleanor, it is for your information.
Yeah, she's on top of this. She's reporting from Washington, D.C., and she knows a
Yes,
thing or two.
indeed, yes.
So whip me there.
Yes, okay. And then you referred to the Global Combat Air Program, which is the program between the UK, Italy, and Japan, which has been set up to co-develop a next generation fighter jet. So I
Right.
think that you are referring to it. So Eleanor helped us with the title of the project there.
Okay, I didn't know that the British were that involved in it. I thought it was the Italians, which is kind of strange and funny when you think about it, but the Italians are very much invested in it, and the Japanese are developing this new fighter that both of them will co-produce and then sell on the open market, but probably uh, they'll have the restricted use of this advanced fighter for a couple of years. And yeah, it's interesting, but I didn't know the British were also involved in it. Makes sense.
Yes. Well, thank you, Eleanor, for the clarification, for the help. It is always appreciated. Also, to Hiroku-san, thank you always for helping us with more information in the comments. We appreciate that too. And with this, Timothy, we are finished with the questions and the comments. So thank you very much. Just one more thing at the end. Christopher says that Timothy's voice is always in my head, even when I'm asleep. So, well, Timothy, I just wanted to let you know that, well, that happens. Oh, that's a beautiful view. That's the harbor of Hota you're showing now to us.
That's the harbor of Hota, where the good ship Santana is berthed. And as soon as I finish this briefing, in that direction is the peninsula of Yokohama, and Misaki is maybe 2.5 hour sail in that direction. But you can see there's lots of boats out, a lot of sailboats out. It's a beautiful
Yes,
day. So I
I
know
can,
what I'm doing after I sign off.
and I can see that you cannot wait to sign off. So, okay, so thank you very much indeed for your time again today, and to everybody who is watching or listening to us. We are going to be here once again next Sunday at 8:20. Thank you very much for that, Timothy. I
Please
am,
hit like.
yes, indeed. Please do hit like and, well, join us again whenever your schedule allows. That's all for today. Thanks a lot and enjoy the weekend.
Thanks. Thanks, everybody. See you next week.
See you.